Every generation inherits a version of Earth's past. It comes packaged in school books, museum labels, and scientific timelines that seem complete, airtight, and unquestionable. But every now and then, something breaks the illusion. An artifact that shouldn't exist, a structure that defies engineering logic, or a piece of ancient art that captures a creature we insist never lived alongside humans. When you start putting these clues together, you're forced to ask a question no one expects. What if the world used to be physically different? Not metaphorically, literally. What if the sky itself was heavier, thicker, and capable of shaping life into forms we can no longer imagine today? This is where our journey begins, not with giants or dinosaurs or buried cities, but with the possibility that Earth's atmosphere was once vastly different from what we breathe now. Imagine stepping outside and feeling a world where the air pressed against your skin with 3, maybe 4 times the density we experience today. A world where sound traveled farther, storms moved differently, and life itself grew to massive sizes simply because the air around it demanded that strength. It sounds like science fiction, but the evidence hiding in plain sight suggests something far stranger than fiction. Because if Earth once had a higher atmospheric pressure, everything we think we know about ancient life and ancient civilizations would shift overnight. Let's start with the basics. Modern physics tells us that atmospheric pressure doesn't just influence weather, it influences biology. Deep under the ocean, where pressure is crushing, organisms grow sturdy, compact, and incredibly strong. A small fish from the deep sea can survive forces that would destroy a human body instantly. In contrast, place a deep-sea creature in low pressure, and its body literally ruptures. Now flip that logic. What would happen if the atmosphere above ground used to be far denser? Life would evolve not to be small and fragile, but large, robust, and powerful. Trees would tower far higher than anything we see today. Animals would be massive, with bones thick enough to support monumental weight. Even humans, if they lived in that world, could have been significantly taller, stronger, and more resilient. This isn't random speculation. It's a theory backed by strange clues, clues that mainstream history brushes aside as coincidences or misinterpretations. Take the ancient reliefs at the Cambodian temple of Ta Prohm. Among the carved animals, lions, monkeys, birds, there is one that absolutely should not be there. A creature with plates along its back and a tail ending in spikes. A perfect match for a stegosaurus. How did artists carve an animal that supposedly vanished 65 million years earlier? Or look at the thousands of Ica stones found in Peru, engraved with scenes of humans riding giant reptiles, performing surgeries, and studying the stars. Many were dismissed as hoaxes, yet some stones came from sealed archaeological layers, untouched for centuries. Then there are the fossilized footprints in the Paluxy riverbed in Texas. Dinosaur tracks, yes, but right next to them, human-shaped footprints pressed into the same rock layer. If these impressions are authentic, they overthrow the conventional timeline entirely. But these mysteries only get stranger when you look at the scale of ancient artifacts. Museums around the world store swords too massive for any modern soldier to wield. Firearms with triggers so large you'd need an entire hand just to pull them. And books so enormous a normal person can barely lift a single page. We label them ceremonial, ornamental, but what if they weren't? What if they belonged to people who lived comfortably at heights of 8, 9, or even 10 feet? Not as medical anomalies, but as a natural result of living in a denser atmosphere. The idea doesn't feel so crazy when you consider this. Everything on Earth is shaped by its environment. Change the environment,
and life must change with it. So the real question is, what happened to that old environment? If Earth once had a higher atmospheric pressure, what brought it crashing down? For an answer, we look not into the distant past, but into the last century. Between the 1950s and 1960s, the United States and the USSR detonated over 1,000 nuclear devices in the atmosphere. These weren't small tests. They were megaton-scale explosions, powerful enough to push shock waves into the upper atmosphere. After these tests, meteorological stations worldwide recorded a noticeable drop in atmospheric pressure. Winters grew colder, wind patterns changed. Even today, older generations remember that sudden, unexplained shift. Scientists quietly acknowledged that atmospheric detonations had a measurable planetary effect. That's one of the reasons the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed in 1963 to prevent further damage to the atmosphere. If a few hundred tests in the 20th century could do that, imagine hundreds of colossal explosions, far larger than any nuclear weapon, could do to the planet. Imagine they happened not 70 years ago, but 200. Now the puzzle pieces start to fit together, because around 200 years ago, something massive happened, something that left scars on every continent. Old cities with their lower floors buried in hard-packed clay and silt, not dust, not sand, silt that only forms during fast-moving floods. Forests across Eurasia and North America that mysteriously reset around the early 1800s. Almost no trees older than that exist today, even though many species can live for half a millennium or more. And those perfectly round craters scattered across the planet. Not the elongated shapes you'd expect from meteorites, but clean circles, the kind that produced by explosions on or above the surface. Put them together, and a single picture emerges. The world wasn't simply hit by disasters. It was struck, systematically, globally, and with unimaginable force. Someone or something launched a war not against cities, not against armies, but against the planet's atmosphere itself. A war aimed at collapsing the sky, draining the pressure that sustained giant life, and reshaping the biomes so completely that the dominant species of the Old World simply could not survive. If that's true, then the giants of legend didn't disappear slowly. They died suddenly because the world that supported their bodies vanished. And humanity, smaller, lighter, and more adaptable, became the inheritors of a redesigned Earth. But the story doesn't end with the physical destruction. The victors didn't just win the world, they rewrote it. They folded myths into fairy tales, reclassified giant artifacts as ceremonial oddities, buried evidence under timelines stretched millions of years into the past, and taught us ourselves as the first, the only, the pinnacle of Earth's story. But history has a way of leaving cracks. Buried floors, impossible tools, ancient carvings, footprints in stone, odd gaps in our forests, strange memories embedded in legend. Put them together, and a new world takes shape. A world where Earth itself was different, where life lived larger, breathed heavier air, and walked under a sky thick enough to cradle titans. Maybe the past isn't just in the ground. Maybe it's in our bones. Maybe the world we lost is still whispering, waiting for someone curious enough to listen. And now that you've heard its echoes, the question becomes unavoidable. What else have we inherited that no one ever told us?
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, share.